Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of Sustainable Conservation's Recharging California webinar series. We really appreciate you all being with us today. We're thrilled to have our expert panelists with us. Before I get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Environmental Science Associates, Holland and Knight, and Spotswood Estate Vineyard and Winery. Thank you for supporting our fall webinar series and for sharing Sustainable Conservation's vision of stewarding our most precious natural resources for all Californians. My name is Richael Young, and I'm the Senior Director of Sustainable Conservation's Water for the Future program. For those of you that don't know us, Sustainable Conservation advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. Every day, we take a big tent approach to bring together businesses, landowners, scientists, government, water agencies, and nonprofits to advance collaborative solutions to steward the natural resources that we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. The first webinar in our fall 2024 Recharging California series featured climate scientist Dr. Daniel Swain, who gave an in-depth explanation of how California's climate is changing and its effects on water. If you missed that discussion, it was amazing, and we highly recommend that you watch the recording. With the challenges that climate change is posing to us, it's critical for us to adapt how we manage water. So today we'll dive into our partners' collaborative efforts to scale and incentivize groundwater recharge across the state. I'll introduce our expert panelists shortly, and I'll ask them a handful of questions. We'll leave a few minutes at the end for audience Q&A, but don't feel like you need to wait until that time to ask your question. Feel free to enter your questions at any time into the Q&A box, and we will get to those towards the end. So before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to ask a few questions so that we have an opportunity to get to know you, our audience. We have a three-part poll that asks where you're joining us from today, what sector you work in, and how you'd rate your level of knowledge on recharge. So please take a moment to answer the poll. And if you don't see your answer reflected, feel free to type it in the chat. Right, waiting for responses to come in. Okay, great. Well, we can see we've got quite a few people joining us from the Bay Area, from the Sac Valley. That's where I'm coming to you from. We've got quite a few from the San Joaquin Valley as well. It's great. Um, Lots of folks coming from government background today, kind of spread through other sectors as well. And good mix of knowledge on incentives for groundwater recharge too. So we've got some beginners, lots of folks kind of rate themselves in the average category, and a handful in the experts. These are great. Fabulous. Okay, well, with that, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists and start diving into the discussion. So first up, we have Kitty Campbell, who is the Supervisor of Resources for Westlands Water District, which is the largest agricultural water district in the United States. In this role, Kitty oversees the implementation and regulatory compliance of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act for the West Side Subbasin. Next, we have Wendy Rash, who is the State Water Quality Specialist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, NRCS, California. Wendy has managed the groundwater recharge pilot program for NRCS California with the goal of adding farm-scale groundwater recharge practices to the catalog of NRCS conservation practices. Next, we have Karun Samran, who is the manager of Bapu Farming Company. Karun is a Central Valley native and has spent his life working in agriculture. Karun's family farms pistachios, almonds, and wine grapes throughout the valley in varying water situations. So welcome all. We're so happy to have you with us here today. So I'd like to just get us started with an opportunity to give an overview. So, given the climate extremes that we're facing in California, this whiplash of going from droughts to deluge, I'd love to hear a bit about how you're thinking about that and preparing for it.
Oh, I guess I'll start. Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming and listening to us talk. Recharge is something I have gotten really involved in since coming back from college and helping our family operation because going forward, kind of seeing the recharge is the one thing that's the only way we can increase our internal water supply because, it's really tough in this state to get new projects done. So recharge is one of the ways we can actually increase the supply we have underground. One way how I prepare for recharge is every winter I have to go in the mindset that there's a chance of flood flows. It's really tough to believe that, but no one had thought after a year we had in 2022 that we'd have a year like 2023. But if you really want to be successful at recharge, you have to be ready by January 1st as a farmer to be able to capitalize on any flood flows coming out from the mountains. It involves getting all of your field work done and getting any sprays done. All of that has to be done at the farm because once those flood flows come, you want to capitalize every single day because those every day is so precious. So you don't want to have to be cutting back your recharge just to get some orchard work done or anything done in the grapes because that's another day you lost.
Yeah, I'll just build off of what Karun said. As an agency, we've been really focused on water conservation for a long time, trying to increase irrigation efficiency on farms to try to deal with water shortages and droughts. On sort of the other end of the spectrum, doing erosion protection and flood control type projects on farms to deal with sort of those high water years. So we're really trying to shift our mindset to turning those wet years into a resource, and really being able to think about both things at the same time. And like Karun said, like preparing for wet a wet winter, even at the same time that you are also, making those preparations for a potential drought. Like just being able um, to swing on that pendulum, right? Because we're going back and forth, and so just being able to hold all of that in your mind at the same time and be prepared for whatever extreme happens to come.
So hi, I think I'd like to add, and I do have a few slides to share on how we prepare for recharge. And this would be coming to the group from the perspective of a groundwater sustainability agency, because we've recognized that recharge can't occur overnight. So we need to do many pre-work to ensure that we have a successful program as we implement our groundwater sustainability plan. So with that as a vision, the district has done an immense amount of research to ensure that we're ready to recharge when we have a big gulp type year like we experienced in 2023. So in order to prepare, we did some research on aquifer storage and recovery, which is a recharge strategy down an existing groundwater well that allows any land in our subbasin to be able to recharge. We also operated a pilot project to encourage growers to develop basins and start recharging with surplus water that was available in 2019. And what was key about that pilot project is we didn't have an adopted groundwater sustainability plan yet. So growers might have been apprehensive to participate because, what was the value to them in recharging? And what we determined early on was we could generate groundwater credits, which would increase a pumping opportunity in a future year when we go down the route of allocating the sustainable yield. So that was, something that we've done to prepare for recharge. We've also done a number of geotechnical studies. And one thing that's unique about our subbasin, but I know it's in many other subbasins, is we have a confining layer. And that clay layer divides our aquifer into two aquifer systems. So we really wanted to make sure that we got the message out that if you're considering recharge at some point in the future, there are specific areas that are good for lower aquifer recharge, and that is what's shown on the map to the left. And there are specific areas that are more favorable for upper aquifer recharge, and also really makes sense because we have upper aquifer wells in those areas. So we've done a lot of research to get this messaging out here. And this information is posted on our website. We also recognize that one type of project won't work for all growers. And so while getting ready for recharge, we looked at the possibility of percolation basins, which is probably the most common form of recharge. And that's what's in the first cartoon. KSR is the direct injection into the aquifer you're pumping from. And the benefits that we found in researching this recharge strategy is that you create a nice bubble of great quality water, and it goes directly into the aquifer. You're not having to wait for it to infiltrate. On-farm recharge is also a great option, especially in the fall and winter. And that's just the over-irrigation. And then sublateral recharge is another technology that's being implemented in our subbasin. And this allows farmers to grow at ground surface, whatever crops they've planned, and recharge below the root zone. And I would just note that we have found, as we prepared for recharge through our groundwater sustainability plan, and as we've prepared for recharge in the future, we have seen a lot of success. This map depicts that all the efforts that our board put into our groundwater sustainability plan to prepare for groundwater recharge had a lot of success. We have implemented over 600 projects through partnerships with growers. That has really increased our ability to recharge. And so we plan to continue to do these types of research and outreach to ensure we continue to grow in the recharge frame.
Fabulous. Thank you all so much for giving a little bit of background. And, it's very clear that there's a lot of preparedness that goes into developing these programs. Kitty, I don't know if you still are intending to share screen, but you are still screen sharing.
I'm sorry.
All good. All good. All good. Yeah, I'm curious too if you can tell us a bit more about how you've designed or the particular structure of some of these on-farm recharge programs, and the things that you've seen have been successful to building those programs.
Are you directing that question to all of us or me?
All of you, but happy to start with you, Kitty, and then we can transfer to our other panelists.
Sure. So we've had a lot of success implementing that on farm because we did develop a groundwater allocation program, which allocates our sustainable yield pro rata based on the land. And so farmers are able to determine how much water is available each year and determine if that's sufficient to meet their planting needs. And so since they're aware of that allotment, it has encouraged them to develop recharge. Another incentive we've done is created programs to encourage growers to partner with the district to recharge water that might get lost at the end of the year. And we've done that through paying growers to recharge on our behalf, and we keep all of the groundwater credits generated. And then another program is where we pay for the water and just split the credit with the grower. And those have been two really favorable incentive programs.
Yeah, I'll just say for NRCS, we're working towards being able to fund groundwater recharge for farmers. So I really loved your cartoons, Kitty. So the types of recharge that we are developing are conservation practice standards, which basically would allow us to work with growers and give financial assistance towards those practices. And the two types, she showed four different types of groundwater recharge on that one slide with the cartoons. The types that we are doing are the on-farm recharge or flood mar, where we're flooding active agricultural fields, and also the basin style, basin or trench, if it's sort of a linear feature style of recharge. So those are the two practices that we have been piloting in our project. And our numbers are pretty modest, even compared with Kitty's. I think you guys have achieved a lot there in Westlands. We were able to do our first year of recharge in 22-23 through the EQIP program and worked with several growers on about 3,000 acres to do mostly on-farm recharge. We only had one basin that was able to get built in time to actually be used that winter, but we did have one basin built, and we've got more built ready to go into this winter with, fingers crossed that we'll get some water into those basins. So we are continuing to work on that. And sort of the background is that NRCS actually nationally did not recognize groundwater depletion as a resource concern officially until about 5 years ago, which meant that we did not have any conservation practices sort of on the books to directly address groundwater depletion. And so California has really pushed for this recognition and for the practice itself. It was developed from all of the research that's gone on in California and all of the sort of pioneers in floodmar and in groundwater recharge that have been working in California to develop the practice standards, which are now sort of at national headquarters, awaiting their stamp of approval so that we can really be able to assist growers statewide with both the technical assistance, like how do you set up the field, how do you build the basin, how do you evaluate the site, exactly what Westlands has done sort of internally. And then operationally, how do we help them through our financial assistance programs and hopefully pairing those incentives up with incentives that would come from the district, like those benefits to their allocation balances.
Yeah, so since I've been back from college back in 2017, I've gone through 3 wet years. We had 2017, 19, and 2023. And every year I try to just build up on it. In 2017, there was talks about recharge, but it wasn't really formally recognized as, hey, this is a practice we really need to get a bit behind. I feel like every year we get more and more behind it, get more buy-in. And I just been building up on it. So I've been doing an in-district round, out-of-district round on multiple crops. And it's just we've been mostly just doing flood mar. We started doing some bigger projects now since we are in the white area. We actually have a credit system. So now it's actually been easier to pencil out an ROI of scaling up recharge. Before it was just something we talked about, but there wasn't any numbers behind it where a grower can justify spending that money, especially with, post-COVID, the commodity prices, price hikes. Every grower is stretching out every dollar they have. And we were always being told, hey, you got to recharge, But how can we recharge when we need to keep any money we got in our pocket to kind of survive? But it wasn't until 2023 when, Governor Newsom came out with the executive order, established or allowed people to take flood water off some of the waterways where traditionally people didn't have the rights to. Then that opened up GSAs to allow credit systems, recharge credits. And from there, that's when you could say that theoretically and figuratively, the floodgates opened up and you saw a rush of a lot of growers, especially in the Madera County area, Merced County area, where they were like, okay, hey, now there's a system we can play by. If we need to go rent pumps, we need to go rent pipe, now we can actually justify the cost. And so that's what I'm trying to do. Every year I'm trying to build up on it. And what helps is kind of knowing, okay, I'm going to spend this money, but I do know I'm going to get something in return.
That all makes so much sense. And it's fascinating to hear, all three of you really talk about the importance of these incentives, whether they be, credits and building towards allocations or compensation being really important to scaling your programs. To me, it's also really fascinating to hear some of the policy levers, whether it be the governor's executive order or Wendy talking about making the groundwater depletion a resource concern. It's just fascinating to hear how some of these policy barriers can be really important in getting in the way of doing, good water management. So really fascinating discussion. Clearly recharge has evolved a lot in the, last 5 to 10 years. And so I'd love to hear, what some of your aha moments have been, or what have been kind of the most important things you've learned in doing recharge.
I guess I'll start. We'll just kind of just go in a snake draft, I guess. One thing I did learn is it can be detrimental. I mean, there is like a upper threshold on how much your crop can take on in, a certain amount of time. I learned the hard way back in 17 and 19 and what not to do when it comes to recharging almonds. Um, Another thing is I also learned, and this is really going to be interesting how a lot of growers face this situation going forward. With Sigma, we know that there's going to be a lot of cropland just becoming not farmed anymore. And there's going to be argument to say, okay, well, do we kind of force out the bad producing acreage or the good producing acreage? Because you can't. So a lot of people are going to try to make those choices. Well, what I've been learning is my most productive farmland is my best recharger ground because your most productive farmland is the ground that can let water pass through the soil profile the most effectively. And that's where we're learning we're getting the best recharge results. Where we try to do recharge on some soil that's either high in alkaline or hard pan layers or super clay, you don't get the results. And so you kind of start rethinking this thing where, okay, I might have to tear out less acreage if I do it on better ground compared to tearing out more acreage if I do it on marginal ground. It's every year we keep learning more and more. But another thing we learned is only you know how your ground is going to react. I have farms that when you pull up the SAGB, I don't know what the acronym fully spells out, but it's a soil tool that growers can use and see on how suitable their ground is for recharge. And I've had some farms that scored really good, but then don't recharge very well because there's something going on down 5, 6 feet where, the SAGB rating does not go down to that was really detrimental to the recharge. But I got some fields where it scores horribly, but there's something about, that fresh snow runoff water reacting with that soil just opens up the ground and lets a lot of water pass through. So when growers ask me, "Oh, well, okay, what's your advice on when I want to do it?" I was like, "Hey, just go out there. You know your soil best. Go out there, dig soil pits with a backhoe or do something, And I kind of go back to that whole argument I had before. It's kind of your better ground is better recharge ground.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variability in site selection, and we've struggled with that too because we definitely want to be putting the funding towards the places that have the best ability to recharge, and sort of figuring that out without having to get so granular is difficult. And so we have used SAGB, which is Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index. There's also the groundwater recharge assessment tool, which goes a little bit deeper, but Karun's absolutely right. Like often the site-specific observations will override those data sources, right? Like you can kind of screen using those data sources that are sort of broad, but you really do have to get down to the field level to understand how the recharge will actually work. And one of the things that we've been struggling with also is just the water supply, like having a secure supply of water that if floodwater becomes available, if excess surface water becomes available, it will be available to growers to do the recharge. And that has to do with water rights. It has to do with conveyance. It has to do with, whether that district is willing to deliver water in their off season when normally, they don't have as many people working, or maybe the canals are undergoing maintenance and they can't really put water down them. And so really understanding those details of moving the water and obtaining the water, and what's the water going to cost, right? Like what's the cost to the district, what's the cost to the grower, to make it pencil out for them. Like even if we do give them, a grower, a payment to do that recharge, does it pencil out for them? So those are all just sort of the realities that we're sort of wrestling with as we try to roll out this assistance program and make it effective.
I think those are all great points. I think what I would add is the biggest thing we've learned is that there is an engineering solution to every problem. And when we did our research related to recharge, that's why we looked at 4 different alternatives, because we have eastern areas of our subbasin that are drainage impaired. So over irrigation, sublateral, those aren't options for recharge. So ASR is a slam dunk anywhere in the basin. But when you're thinking about the big gulf, you want to be able to do floodmar and you want to be able to do basins, because you're able to recharge a lot more water over a short period of time. And so we've identified areas where basin style recharge works. And I think with all the potential solutions that growers could implement, and having the resources at their fingertips has allowed us to evolve in the recharge well in the district. Westlands didn't recharge anything prior to 2019. And in 2019, we recharged 2,000 acre feet. And in 2023, we recharged almost 400,000 acre feet. So I do think that just recognizing that you are going to have problems, but what's the solution, and what's the solution that works for one grower is not going to work for all growers. So as many options that you're able to provide to landowners interested in recharging, that's how you're going to really have success in your programs. And I think that's our aha moment.
That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like one common thread from all of your insights is just how much the local context matters, and thinking about, either specific soil types or specific hydrology that's going on, under the ground. So really fascinating to hear. I'd love to hear a bit more about just kind of scaling potential. Obviously, in order for us to meet the large magnitude of drought and flooding risks that we have, these solutions are going to need to be done not just kind of on a small scale, but really at a large scale. And so can you walk me through how you're thinking about scaling these programs?
So from a GSA perspective, and we're also a water district, we're only able to scale up if we have surface water to increase our recharge activities. So that's one thing that we're always looking at is what's the timing of our surface water allocation? Are there any other surplus surface water available? So, in 2023, we did 400,000 acre feet. In the next wet year, our target would be to 600,000 acre feet. And in order to achieve that target, we've identified that it's important to get the messaging out there sooner, because things like aquifer storage and recovery and sublateral recharge can start occurring at any point, because you're not worried about really high evaporative losses. We also are looking to do our own projects and build more projects in the district. So in 2023, the district had a recharge capacity of about 10,000 acre feet. And now we've increased our recharge capacity to 30,000. And so how do we continue to increase our recharge capacity and also provide instrumental support to landowners who are interested in increasing their ability to recharge through items such as temporary diversions. And those are temporary pumps that allow them to increase their recharge capacity instead of relying on our distribution system, which has some limitations.
Yeah, for us, the scaling would really be moving from that pilot zone out statewide. And it does present some challenges to us, not only in funding, funding is not unlimited. Our funding comes through the Farm Bill conservation title. And so there's a lot of competing resource concerns out there. And we do a lot of work in other arenas as well as groundwater recharge. So um, trying to increase that slice of pie might be a challenge for us as we do go statewide, as well as, there will be technical challenges in working in multiple different areas. Like our pilot program has been in the San Joaquin Valley, but folks in the Sacramento Valley are really interested in doing recharge as well. And they have a lot more tight soils up there, a lot more clay soils. So it may be less opportunity to do on-farm recharge. We might be doing more basins in that area. And then on the Central Coast, they've been doing a lot of recharge by doing stormwater capture, which we haven't really looked into, in terms of a water source. So it will present some technical challenges, as well as yeah, just funding availability, I think, will be a challenge as we try to scale out to cover California.
Yeah, kind of just going back to Wendy's point, well, it comes back to funding. Growers have been really sh short with their money recently, and so I mean, you have a lot of buy-in now that going forward in the San Joaquin Valley, recharge is a necessity rather than something we should look into. But when the farm economics aren't there, then no one really wants to go out and spend some money. It does help that, there's funds available through the USDA, but how Wendy is saying it's still like a pilot program. I believe I'm in one of their pilot programs, just haven't been able to capitalize on it because there hasn't been any flood flows. Um, there's also a lot of bureaucracy, regulation, red tape. Um, in, Luckily, we got the executive order last year and Newsom signed, but I believe that's only effective till well, it was supposed to only be effective till 2026. Then they signed another bill to push it to 2032. Well, there's been a lot of talk about why don't we just push it all the way down to 2040 because that's when all the Sigma plans are going to be rolled out. And by 2040, we should be sustainable. By then, that gives all the agencies, growers to go out and establish the rights or go through the proper protocol to do these diversions. So you can go on days on how you can send water from districts out of districts, and that's a whole nother bureaucracy deal when it comes to federal water and where it can be put out to. But what we do know is when we had a year like last year, if we were able to capture all that water, we are able to bank enough water for years and years to come. I know in one of our sub basins, I sit on a water district board out here in Chowchilla. We let some water run through our district because we just didn't have one, the internal infrastructure as a district to put in our own recharge ponds, and two, that we didn't have enough growers take it off the system as well. And we pushed out enough water that would have made it sustainable. It was enough water that covers our overdraft for 3 to 4 years. So if we were to pull that water on, then we didn't really need to do any other projects as we filed in our GSP. But it just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money.
Super helpful. I think that you all are touching on this, but I'm definitely hearing funding can be a big barrier and perhaps a call to action. I'm curious, what support would you need? Of course, this could include funding, but just any types of support that come to mind when you think about further scaling your on-farm recharge efforts.
I think the first start off, it'd be nice if the USDA can kind of open up the funding throughout the valley. I know that this is kind of how it works. They start with a pilot project and see if it works or not, and then start scaling it out. It's tough to go get private funding for this type of stuff because a lot of this a lot of recharges are going to be done on ground that has marginal water supply, and banks are already really nervous about lending to those types of properties. If they already have a note on it, a land mortgage note, they don't want to give out more money to a grower and not have surety that grower can make their payments in the future because they don't know about their water supply. So private funding is really tough. So all it comes out to NRCS. I don't know if CDFA is going to be coming out with funds or anything, but that's sort of coming. There's talks about, people paying into GSAs and GSAs and redispersing those funds out to some growers who have easier access to waterways. It's really tough, and especially kind of really having to scale it up. Every little thing costs money. I just talking to some growers in my neighborhood who were so forward thinking 10, 15 years ago, and how cost effective they got stuff done back then with engineering, groundwork, permits. They were able to do it for like a tenth of the cost what it is now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we definitely need more funding. I'm hearing the same type of comments from our growers, and at the grower level, there aren't a lot of funding opportunities out there. And at the GSA level, there are some, but they're dwindling, unfortunately. But I think if, as a state, we can continue to show metrics that the money provided to support these projects has really measurable metrics of positive resolution as it relates to SGMA, then we can hopefully be successful in sending more money to support grower recharge projects as well as groundwater sustainability agency recharge projects. For example, in our basin, everything that we did last year, with the exception of one project, was funded by the district. And we saw our groundwater conditions improve by 85 feet on average, and elastic subsidence in our subbasin, which is really rare. I mean, once it subsides, it's supposed to, not be recoverable. But because of all of the recharge that was done last year and in lieu, we really saw some positive results. So I think if we can get the state and the feds to recognize that, then that would help our messaging for the need for additional funding and how it has positive impacts on the aquifers and how it helps achieve sustainability goals.
One thing,
Oh,
sorry.
I just want to have a quick follow-up with Kitty, because I think that this is such an incredible success story, and just, so that this isn't lost for some of our audience members that may be more in like a beginning area of their knowledge of recharge. Can you just explain a little bit more about in lieu recharge, and then also the effects that you saw in subsidence and especially this elastic subsidence, because I think that this is such a great success story.
Sure, and I have a slide I could show that highlights our successes as it relates to elastic subsidence, but I'll first highlight what in lieu is. So in lieu recharge means that you're delivering surface water because it's available instead of pumping groundwater. That is actually the most proactive way to help sustain your aquifers. So one of our biggest platforms in our groundwater sustainability plan is to ensure the continuance of the delivery of surface water. And then as it relates, can you see my screen?
No.
Maybe?
Oh, there it is. There it goes.
Okay, and as it relates to subsidence, essentially we have the Corcoran clay in our subbasin, and that is a clay layer that can be dewatered with pumping from the lower aquifer. And so we only pumped 10,000 acre feet last year, which is a record low since we've been monitoring groundwater pumping since 1955. So we had the benefit of in lieu recharge, which is delivering surface water and not pumping groundwater, and recharge. So basically two benefits. And as a result of those benefits, we saw elastic subsidence, meaning that instead of the clay lens being dewatered, it saw some recovery. And it wasn't a large amount, but all the blue and green on this map, for the most part, represents recovery when you compare the subsidence data from January of 2023 to January of 2024. And it's as much as 1/2 foot in some areas of our subbasin.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Kitty. And Wendy, I interrupted you, so
Oh, no.
apologies.
That's okay. I was just going to comment on some of the support. I think that will be important going forward. And one really important topic we haven't touched on is water quality in relationship to recharge. And I know that the state is working on trying to look at the impacts of recharge on water quality and see, um, how can we better plan for recharge so that not only are we bringing water levels up, but that we're also either not harming or improving water quality. And this, of course, has huge impacts for the GSAs and GSPs in terms of, or sorry, I I'm using acronyms and maybe I shouldn't, but the groundwater sustainability agencies and the groundwater sustainability plans for protecting wells for communities and individual homeowners who use shallow rural wells that have been going dry by the hundreds and more over the drought period. So we want those wells to have water, but we also want them to have good quality water. And so really understanding how recharge is impacting water quality is going to be super important, not only for validating for NRCS how this conservation practice is working. You know, we don't want the trade-off of more water but poorer quality. So we want to validate that we're actually doing something good for the resource, but then also just to address that drinking water source protection. That's such an important issue across the state.
This is very tied to a question that came up in our audience Q&A, so I'm going to bring it in now. Thinking about kind of these water quality consideration, how does groundwater recharge in or around agricultural fields influence the levels of nutrients, pesticides, and other contaminants in nearby surface water and groundwater systems? So yeah, just maybe a little more explanation of some of those water quality considerations.
Yeah, and the answer is it's so complicated, right? Like there are very, very smart people at many universities trying to figure out how does groundwater move and how does it carry those constituents that are used in farming? How is it moving to the wells? And it's because soil is so heterogeneous, which it's so variable in space, and you've got 3 dimensions. So how water moves and how it's carrying those materials and as they interact with the soil as they go, um, it's super complicated. And so it's really impossible to say. It's really impossible to say sort of a blanket, it takes 5 years for the nitrate to get to a well. You just don't know. And so what you have to do is use modeling and use your best impressions from the science that's happened. Like, how do we protect that groundwater? And one thought is if we put enough water in one place, we're going to dilute those materials that are already there, right? There's been decades and decades of farming that's put nitrate into our a vadose zone, that zone below the soil and above the groundwater, where it's there. We can't get it back out, right? But if we put pulses of water, we can potentially dilute that to a level that is not harmful. Pesticides, the best we can do is try not to be putting pulses of water down, while those pesticides are in use, while we're actively farming. And so we've really tried to focus our on-farm recharge efforts on the off season when those farms are not actively fertilizing and they're not actively using those leachable pesticides. So we're trying to be protective of the water quality, but the answer is it's really hard to know. It's really hard to know what the impacts are of that individual recharge event on that individual farm, how that's going to impact wells in the vicinity, because it's so complicated what goes on in those underground processes. And we're trying to learn more, and we're trying to be protective and trying to, stay away from sort of red flags. Like, we don't want to recharge on places where there's been, a long history of dairy manure being applied, right? Because there's just such a large reservoir there of potential problems. So we don't, we're working on it, but yeah, it's not a yes or no question at this point.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Wendy. Another question that came up in the chat is related to, monitoring and quantification of recharge. And so, if some of y'all could speak to this, the question is specifically, have recharge basins been analyzed and monitored by remote sensing tools? And even if the answer is no, some discussion on monitoring and quantification would be great.
Sure, I can briefly answer that question. So in our subbasin, we have meters at every single recharge project. So that's how we monitor how much water was discharged at a particular basin or recharge project. And then we do have a pretty robust monitoring network that was included in our groundwater sustainability plan that we routinely monitor to measure the results from the recharge activity.
Yeah, I think the best we can do right now is measure the applied water, as Kitty was explaining. So how much water is actually going into the project. Again, it's really, really hard unless you've got lots of instrumentation, lots of wells going on in a specific site to really understand specifically where that water goes. I mean, it's going down and it's going towards your water table, but you don't know how long it's going to take for it to get there. So really the best we can do is measure applied water at this stage.
Yeah, in our area as well. The districts, they have meters on going to all their recharge basins. They were also marking all water that was recharged by growers during the times where the crop wasn't giving off any ET. Our sub-basin, both sub-basins on Montgomery County, they have well monitors all over the place where they drilled new wells just to monitor the water table. They're also going to start monitoring the 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 heavy metals in the water as well, the nitrates. So we're going to try to start seeing, or at least painting the picture on what happens as you increase your recharge efforts. How does that affect your groundwater quality? So, I mean, when it comes to groundwater, because now, in your groundwater sustainability plan, you have marks to meet on how many acre feet you recharge. So districts, even guys that aren't in the districts, but they're in a GSA managed or GSA that manages a wide area, they're marking and metering every single drop they put on their field that's earmarked for recharge.
So clearly a large focus on quantification and measuring that applied water. This is certainly related, but could either Kitty or Karun, given that you've talked a bit about the credit systems, could you just briefly describe or give a brief explanation of how the groundwater credit system works?
Sure, happy to. So the way our groundwater credit system works in our district is for every 1 acre of land, you have a sustainable yield of 0.6 acre feet. And so if you have 100 acres, then you'll be allocated 60 acre feet that you can pump. That is through implementation in 2030. However, as we're working our way to that full implementation, we've included something called a transition allocation. So we're giving growers more than the sustainable yields so that they can prepare for full implementation. And this year, the sustainable yield allocation was also 0.6. So in that same example, they would be allocated 120 acre feet. As we go through our implementation period, the transition allocation reduces by 0.1 acre feet per acre each year. So by 2030, we'll be at full implementation and growers will only be allocated 0.6 acre feet per acre. They do have the benefits of the program of being able to carry over their water. So for example, last year, nobody pumped any groundwater. And so they were able to carry over their 120 acre feet that they were allocated. So it increases their pumping opportunity in a year with less surface water. They also have the ability to augment their groundwater credit through groundwater recharge. And so we had growers do that as well. So when you look at our basin as a whole for this year, you might see that we have about 300,000 acre feet of sustainable yields. 1,000 acre feet of transition allocation and 320,000 acre feet of groundwater credits that were generated last year. And those are all in growers' accounts. But they are likely not to use them this year. So for example, we're only projecting about 100,000 acre feet will be pumped this year. So it's kind of an evolving program, and there are a lot of benefits if growers preserve their groundwater.
Yeah, likewise to Kitty. So, and my property is in the white area, which is, non-districted land that doesn't have any surface water allocation. Our GSA has implemented a groundwater allocation, and what the goal is to get to sustainable yield by 2040. And same thing, you use it 100% good. If you go over, there's a penalty. You don't use all of it, and you can carry over some. And then last year they implemented recharge credit, and so whatever acre foot you put in, you would get anywhere from 75% to 90% of that back credit to your account. Because there's going to be some loss where once that water gets in the aquifer, does it really stay in your property? No, it's like once fugitive property once it kind of goes down there. So that's how it works in our area as well. And then some of the districts I'm in, there's no allocations on groundwater yet. There's no recharge credit system yet. So I'm a kind of get a mix of both worlds.
Thank you both for explaining that further. We're running out of time, and so let's see. I think we have so many more questions in the Q&A than we have time available, so I apologize to our audience members. We had a couple of folks ask, though, about how water rights relate to groundwater recharge and the different sources that are being used for recharge. So to the extent that any of you can comment on that, that'd be great.
Sure, my answer will be brief because most of our recharge occurred using our Central Valley Project water. So we're just conjunctively using it, and we didn't have to get a new water right.
This is definitely a hurdle that we've encountered with our pilot program, and why we really centered that pilot program within districts, because we wanted to work under their water rights. It's sort of a weird artifact of the water rights system that groundwater recharge is not considered a beneficial use of the water. It's considered water storage. And so you have to have a specific permit or a specific right on your water permit in order to store water, whether it be in a surface pond or whether it be underground. You have to have a special sort of rider on your water right that lets you do that. So individual growers often don't have that. Even if they have riparian rights to surface water, they often don't have the right to store that water. And so that is definitely something that the state is working on, trying to streamline that situation of adding those rights if you have a surface water right. But it is still expensive and it still takes a long time. And so working under the rights that districts have is a whole lot easier, which also complicates things for people in the white areas, right? Because it's really hard to get your hands on that water and really be able to store it.
Yeah, we could probably talk for another hour just about this. Um, it's just I mean it's not as simple as like the haves versus the have-nots, but it kind of does come down to that. You either have the right, by being in the district to some property of water right to some sort of projected water, or you don't, or you have riparian rights. But technically, if you have riparian rights, groundwater recharge is not one of the beneficial uses of riparian rights, so you technically can't be doing that. Um, it's just one of those things where ag is trying to push the agenda, but legislatively, we're just falling a little bit behind. I mean, I don't think the executive order that Newsom signed came out till March. And I know tons of people that did not want to go out from January, February, or I mean, we started getting flood flows in that 2023 wet year around Christmas in my area. So we missed a solid week and a half there, and 2.5, maybe 2 months and another week. We missed almost 3 full months of capture and recharge because growers were like, why should we go out on a limb when there's not any legislative backing it up? And once that did happen, then growers were more motivated to do it. And I can speak from experience. My recharge projects last year were really scaled down until that came out, and then we really ramped it up, and I was able to get a lot of other people to ramp it up because then there was finally an incentive to do something. Um, and some people it's unfortunate they're next to some canals or bodies of water where they technically do not have the appropriate right to that water. But what we're learning is, I mean, we are blessed by having one of the biggest watersheds in the entire world with the Sierra Nevadas. And if there's a way we can just better utilize these wet years, we can really solve a lot of water security problems going forward.
Well, thank you all so much. This is just incredible to tap into your expertise and learn a bit about how you've thought about developing these programs and what you see as, kind of being the future for being able to scale these further. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And thank you everyone for tuning in too. We hope that you've enjoyed the conversation. We'll be sending the recording soon in case you missed any parts or you'd like to revisit the discussion. The third webinar in our Recharging California series is still in the works, but it is going to be highlighting the importance of collaboration and how sustainable conservation is prioritizing our partnerships to scale groundwater recharge. So please keep an eye out as the date will be announced in the next few weeks. If you'd like to follow Sustainable Conservation's work, please find us on social media, subscribe to our email list, or consider a donation. These webinars and our program work are fueled by the generous contributions of organizations and individuals like you. All new and increased donations are currently being matched dollar for dollar, so please consider donating by visiting suscon.org/give or by scanning the QR code on your screen. So thank you again for joining, and we hope to see you again for the rest of our fall series. Have a great day.